Hi, everyone. This is Jeremy with the second episode of How I Got into PT School. I'm very fortunate to be joined today by Joanna, one of my classmates who recently graduated from PT School with me. And again, a shout out and a congratulations to you for finishing the NPTE.
Thank you, and congrats to you too. You passed.
Yes, we did. Okay, with that being said, tell us a little bit about yourself. So, where are you from?
Yeah, I'm from born and raised Southern California in this little kind of niche, it's not that little though, this niche area, half Hispanic, half Asian. We're colloquially known as 626, which is our area code, and it's mostly because of the food. So you're thinking high immigrant population, lots of good, authentic food.
Okay, so it's the 626, go there to get the food.
Yeah, and I think being in LA, now that I've moved up to the Bay Area, which is where I am now in San Francisco, I miss kind of all of those little niches. So you had like Koreatown and like little Japan, little Tokyo, and it was so easy to just go there and get like $15 all you can eat Korean barbecue, and that price and the quality feels kind of unheard of now that I'm up here.
Right. I come from a small town too, and honestly, one of the best things that I missed from that town was the food trucks. And I mean, like literally,
Yeah.
like a guy would park his truck, and then out of like the truck bed, he'd fire up a grill and start cooking, and it was just the best food.
Yeah.
So I can resonate with the missing the food from your local home. So you went to school there, I'm assuming from what kindergarten to high school, or
Yeah, so kinder through high school was all around home, and then after that went to UCLA for undergrad and took one gap year and then was in PT school.
oh, very nice. So in school, coming up, getting ready to apply for PT school, did you do any sports as a child, or what was your experience like with that?
So I was, it's very interesting. Our where I live had three high schools, and my mom was very adamant about me attending one of them because it was the quote academically better one. And I fought to go to the other one where all my friends are going because when you're of that age, that's really what matters to
Yeah.
you. And I'm kind of glad I did because that was probably the best high school to grow me more as a person. And I felt like the academics just kind of came. And luckily for me, it comes a little more naturally, and I can admit that. So I did things like leadership, so student body in high school. I was in cross country and track and field, and I was in the marching band. So I was able to kind of immerse myself in also different kind of personalities. So each group had their own type of way that it functioned and types of people that it drew. So it allowed me to kind of learn to work with different people too. So that was kind of high school. And then I didn't do any athletics when I went into college. It was more like, okay, maybe I should focus on academics a little bit more, but I still love that leadership, that planning stuff. I ended up being in a cultural organization and also in a Panhellenic sorority.
Man, yeah. So it sounds like you have a very eclectic collection of these experiences that you're drawing from going into your application for applying to PT school. Um, when did you first start considering PT as a career? Was it, through all these experiences? Because usually the reason why I ask about sports is that's a lot of like people's intro into PT school, right? Is they hurt themselves and they go and they see a PT. Was something similar for you, or?
It wasn't, and I think I don't, looking back, I don't know if it's the culture of at least where my high school was. We didn't have any physical therapists. When I look back now to like, let's say I want to find one for my mom or my grandma, there aren't as many as I thought. And they're not, it's not as easy as like when someone's like, oh, this hurts. Typically, they're just going to tell you to go see a chiropractor because we have a little bit more of those in our area. And so for PT, for me, I didn't actually really know it as a true career. I was on track to kind of wanting to be a doctor. And that was what I set out to be kind of for the first 3 years. And I got really lucky. There was a program for a hospital where we kind of signed up. And then if you made it through, you went through this rigorous, I think it was almost 30 hours of training.
Oh, wow.
And then you took a practical and a written exam, And had you passed, then you get to work. But it was so nice because you worked almost like a CNA, so a nursing assistant, and you helped out the nurses in this under kind of at risk hospital. So
Mm.
I took a lot of vitals. I helped bathe, helped feed patients. And then as you worked more hours, you unlocked tiers to move to different departments.
Oh, interesting.
And so then I was like playing around with which departments, and physical therapy just sounded interesting. I was like, oh, I wonder what they do. And it and at the time I also got to speak with a lot of doctors, and they were telling me kind of how their profession has changed over the years and what the work-life balance is and what you realistically should be expecting versus kind of that picturesque Hollywood presentation of
Right.
what it takes and what it entails. And when I got to meet the PTs and this was in the hospital, I was like, oh, I love what you all do. You spend so much time with the patients. You really get to know them. It was so different than what I expected when like the person I was shadowing would walk in and the person would be like, oh, hey, you're back. So that was kind of what started the whole process for me.
Yeah, that's great. And you bring up a really good point. A lot of people talk about this work-life balance, especially when you're considering to be like a physician. And I have a friend who's currently in med school right now, and that's one of his really largest concerns is as he's deciding which direction he wants to go after med school and for his residency. It's which one has like a good work-life balance. So there is like a misconception I think for some about what it's like to be a physician. Of course, like I think you probably know this, but I think it's like you only see a patient for 7 minutes at a time, if
It's
that.
it's a lot quicker, and I think your role in the interprofessional team is a little bit different.
Yeah,
So I also have a friend, she's starting her residency, and there are times where she's like, yeah, I have like a 15-hour shift today.
yeah,
I'm like, okay, my brain, I don't think it can be on for 15 hours. So
yeah,
it's definitely, you have to see where your passions lie. And if your passions are strong enough to be like, I can do 15-hour shifts, that's not a problem for me. And I had to come to the realization that that was, in fact, a problem for me. It didn't fit who I was as a person. And it partially sometimes can be that ego drop too, because in the standard hierarchy of medicine, you're like, oh, I was going to be at the top.
right.
But just kind of being honest with myself and saying that's not what I want. Like, it's not going to fit who I am as a person. And as a female who eventually is thinking of family and all of those things, it just wasn't going to work with what I wanted in long terms for my life holistically.
Yeah, that's such a good point too, because a lot of people, it sounds like the ego is a large, or at least some, right? It's a large component of what drives them to do certain careers. And I mean, if you're miserable as a physician, and you're gonna be taking it out on your patients, that's not good patient care. And of course, there's the stereotype of the really happy PT, which for the most part, I think every PT I've ever met, that's what drew me to the profession was, man, that guy's really happy. Like, what does he know that I don't? I got to figure out what he's doing in life. So. Um, yeah, those are all very good points. So speaking of physical therapy, so now you've gone through your undergrad, which it sounds like you had this great experience of collecting all different types of or being exposed to, I should say, different fields as well as different types of personalities that kind of help you decide what you want to do. Let's talk about the application season, right? So I'm sure, at least I hope this video is intended for people that are looking to start applying to PT school. And a lot of people, at least when I was applying, I wanted to know what did you have to get in, right? So can you recall what your like your stats were? So like the GRE and your GPA when you were applying to grad school?
Yeah, let me think. So GPA wise, I was always scared. I'm like, if you're looking at straight numbers and you're kind of ignoring the university, sometimes it hurts to be like, why did I go to a harder university? Because these numbers are reflective of the harder classes generally. And so that was something I was afraid of. My cumulative on graduation of all my classes, I think was around a low 3.6. And so I knew that it kind of depended on, those prereqs because you have that separate GPA for that. I was closer to a 3.8 for that. So it was mostly some of my like other classes that brought me down.
Right.
And I did retake one of my classes, one of the OChem classes. So had a C minus at first, retook it, got an A, and I don't remember how it balanced out in terms of the GPA, but it's very clear on my application that like that whole thing happened. And I think the showing that improvement worked in my favor
Right.
because you can also kind of keep a C minus if you want, but I wasn't gonna keep it.
Right. You don't want that on your, you're applying to this grad program and C minus, it looks so horrendous. So,
Yeah, it's good enough where it counts as a pass, but it was also low enough that allowed me to take it again. So that was something that I think I got lucky that I got a low enough grade and not
right.
just a straight C. Yeah.
Right. Right. And then what about your GRE? Do you recall what your scores were around that? Because if I recall correctly, there's two, right? There's an English and then a math
Yeah.
portion. Yeah.
So the English portion for me was a 159 and the math portion for me was a 164.
Very strong in the math.
Oh yeah. And yeah, I think it just works for me well. But I did also just kind of cram and had a really intense study session before my GRE. And I knew where my weaknesses were and also where I was okay with kind of giving up because the kind of input to output ratio wasn't working for me. Like I wasn't
Right.
going to sit myself down and try and memorize a bunch of vocabulary words. I figured I'd take the L on that and my reading comprehension would pull through for me and it worked out.
Yeah, I mean, it clearly it did, right? So, so you brought up some good points, and I think it'd be interesting to kind of dig in a little deeper on them. Which is that some students, I'm sure, they might be in a similar position where they have these grades that are not ideal, and it sounds like you had a class, the OChem, to where you went back and took it again. So you think that's probably not to discourage people, right? Like it's always possible to come back and fix those quote unquote mistakes.
Yeah, it shows in your application. Your application requires so much transparency that it allows for you to it almost shows that like you're resilient. You're not going to let like one bad thing stop you from pursuing what you really want to pursue. And there's also a second section now that I went back and looked on my PT cast where it asked if there's anything else you want to add in. And so the quarter that I tanked, I also tanked another class, and it was because of a bunch of events. I was helping with an organization, and we had over like 80 grand of money into these projects on the line. And so I had basically burned out, and I was honest in my application and said, I learned this that semester, and that's why my grades look like it. But I was able to change it. And my senior year, which was the year where I decided I was going to go into PT school, I was convinced. I was above, I think, like a 3.9 the whole year. I think if you can show that progress, it just kind of shows that you're human, you know?
Yeah, and then that's such a powerful lesson too, right? Knowing where your limits are, and then understanding how to convey that as a point of learning, right? So you found like I can't handle all this stuff, and just being honest with it with your application. Yeah, I think that's a very good takeaway for a lot of people. Yeah, I mean I was in a similar position. I had some not so hot grades applying to PT school. I took what did I take? I took gym when I was in high school at the college, at junior college, because it was cheaper to pay this semester units than it was to pay for a gym membership, and
Right.
I maybe went like twice a week or something because I was in high school and got F's in the class, and so that showed, and so I had to explain that to my application. So, but the point is like keep pushing through and learn something from that, and of course talk about that on your application. How many schools did you apply to? Do you recall?
I applied to, I was a little picky. I did peruse around the internet and read kind of, I went on subreddits, there were Facebook groups, and I was kind of looking around to see what what were good universities and did it matter that you went to a really good university. So it's because back home, since a lot of my parents and my families, they all kind of immigrated here, they only knew of big names. So they figured like big name equals good. But then you don't know that it's program specific. So there are
Right.
times where you might think, oh, a Cal State's not good, but a Cal State might be amazing at these specific programs and maybe even top tier beyond what like my family would think would be an even better university. So I kind of did that to tease apart my choices. And I also, at the time, I don't know if it's still out, PTCast had this wonderful Excel spreadsheet, and it listed all the class requirements that like these programs needed. And there were certain classes that I hadn't taken, I had no interest in paying to take,
Right.
like medical terminology or any of those. So those were auto strikeouts for me. I was like, it's okay. There's enough that I would qualify for that I could strike those out. And my next qualifier was in state, or at least close enough to California. I wasn't ready to pack my stuff and
Right. Ohio
move
didn't
to a
sound
new
good.
place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a very classic LA girl, and seasons don't exist. They haven't existed for me. So going to a place with seasons sounded a little scary. I did apply to one out of state. I don't know what I was thinking at the time I applied to Drexel. It was actually a great experience because I did fly over to do my interview. And I'm kind of glad I did apply to one out of state because then it filled in the mystery of like, could I really do it?
Right.
I knew I had the benefit of having the resources to fly almost kind of for fun, do the interview, see how I felt about the school, how I felt about being that far away from home.
Hmm.
So if you aren't sure if you can handle the caseload of grad school plus being far away, you could try to apply for some of the programs that you would be interested in. And kind of if you get the interview position, go there and see like, can I handle this? Like, can I handle being under pressure almost by myself? I have to build my new support network. And I knew I couldn't once I got there.
Yeah.
So
That's a really important that's a really important lesson because I mean if you recall in our program a couple people dropped out in the first week, or I know one for sure did, right? And then after that we had some other didn't. So I mean, and it's just it's a lot, right? You come from this undergrad, and the experience of, or I should say, the pressure of the program itself is just so much more, right? And they make it very clear to you, like you're not going to have a life, right? You need to focus on this, and so just knowing your limits, it sounds like, is a good lesson for people to take away. Uh, and you also brought up another good point about the when you're applying to schools, the Excel spreadsheet. I remember actually when I was doing an interview at, I want to say it was Sacramento State. You know, you're there with a bunch of other people who had just applied, and so I was talking to one lady who had applied, and I was asking her like, "Whoa, well, like how many schools did you apply to?" And she was saying, "I did all of them. I just applied to like 50 different schools." And I was like, "Did you check to even see if you like met the requirements?" And she's like, "No, I just paid for it and sent out like 100 applications or something like that. It was pretty wild. So do yourself a favor, make sure that your classes, right, actually line up with what's on that Excel sheet that you looked at to make sure that you're even gonna make it into that program in the first
yeah,
place. Because otherwise, you
and
just
it's
waste money.
expensive to apply. It's very energy heavy, especially if the schools you're applying to have kind of secondary essays that they want you to do. Work
Yeah.
smarter, not harder,
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know?
Do yourself a favor. And so you applied to all these schools. How many did you actually get into once you've finished your application season?
I applied to, I want to say, eight-ish schools. My first acceptance was Drexel, and I was like, cool, I have it. That one came very early, actually, kind of at the end of the calendar year. And then my next acceptance was Samuel Merritt, which is where I ended up. I also got that sometime in December. And so for some of when I got kind of my positions for some of these other programs, so I think for the Cal State, I was waitlisted and I just said, no, I'm good. You can take me off the wait list. I did apply to UNLV too because it was close enough to SoCal for me.
Right.
I also said I won't be coming for the interview, so I got an interview spot there. Got an interview spot at Western, which I also turned down. Got an interview spot at UCSF. I went to it because I was kind of interested in just knowing more about the program. But in the interview, when I got the chance to ask questions, some of the answers that I was given, and I think my face kind of gave it away that it wasn't the program that was going to be suited for my personality and what I was looking for in a grad school. And sometimes I feel like people lose that point too. You think, yo, I got to sell myself. I got to find who wants me. And you got to want them too. You're committing a lot of money and kind of 3 years of your life. It's almost like a relationship with the school you're going to. And you got to make sure it fits what you're looking for. It fits where you want to grow. Like what part about you?
Yeah, it's a very good point, right? It's a two-way street, and so you got to make sure that the environment, the type of school that you're going to is going to work with you and how you want to or what you want to get out of it, especially if it's a grad school that you're spending so much money on. Um,
Yeah, and just not letting kind of the name or anything or the pressures of like your friends or family get in the way of that too. Like you're the only one that's going to the interview, so you're the only one that's going to know, is this going to fit me? Is this going to fit who I am as a person?
yeah, such a good point. Yeah, just finding what works for you. Um, when you were applying to the schools, do you recall? So part of the application is that you have to have so many hours shadowing or being associated with physical therapy, whether it be an aide or just a fly on the wall in the room. So how many hours did you have going into the interview?
I want to say, I'm kind of looking at it right now. I think cumulatively 400-ish. Um, I think what worked in my favor because so the timeline for me was I kind of summer going into my last year of undergrad, I did my PT rotation in the hospital. I made that like switch. I'd already taken the MCAT and I was like, you know what? I don't like this. I don't think I have the personality, the drive to do what doctors do. It's a commendable field, but it's not a field that's going to work for me. And to swallow my pride and decide, like, I love what the PTs were doing in the hospital. Like, it was great. So then I did what I feel like no one does as much anymore, or maybe that's just the people that I've spoken to. But I cold called, I cold emailed. I was like, hi, are you looking for a PT intern? Are you looking for a PT aide? And so I got my first internship. It was one of those like the joke slave turnship where
Yeah,
you are kind of just working for free. And that taught me a lot though, just in terms of like, okay, this is what an outpatient clinic could look like. It was a private outpatient. It was pediatrics and adults, so it was a nice experience for me. And I think that added to when an admissions person is looking at your application, what is your variability in the types of settings you've seen? So I got like some hours there, and then because I was in the hospital, I got hospital hours, which I think looks really good on your application too. It's getting that mix. And then after I did some more cold calling and kept kind of just stalking the internet, found a PTA job that I was able to do. So cumulatively between those three is where I got all my hours.
right. Yeah, so that's a really good point, right? Getting it may not so much be about like the total hours you have, but more so about the diversity of experiences, right? And it sounds like you had a very nice diversity of experiences.
Yeah, and it will show in the other parts of your application too. Some people think, oh, it's just going to fill in those numbers and those boxes I get to check. But when you're writing, let's say, secondary essays for schools or even your primary one, you can talk about, like, let's say, things you've learned that are similar across all these settings, or how one setting opened your eyes to understanding, oh, this is like how patients and PTs can work together, how caregivers and PTs can work together.
Right.
So these experiences are more than the numbers you get from them. They're great speaking points for you in your interviews, in your essays, and they'll serve you really well too during school.
Yeah, such a good takeaway. I mean, you're full of pearls today, so I want to keep, as I'm hearing them, I want to keep highlighting them so that if
Yeah.
someone's listening or watching this, they can be like, okay, I need to remember this because that's such an important takeaway, right? Like, understanding, what the, here's a key phrase, biopsychosocial implication of working with all these patients across different settings are. And then, of course, being able to generalize it and pull and extract relatable chunks of information. I think that's so important for someone who's applying to school to be able to understand about taking their hours and what they should be getting out of those hours. Um, so you talked a little bit about several different extracurricular activities that you were doing, a lot of clubs that you were a part of, and of course organizations that you were helping to lead. Let's just kind of, could you go over real fast what all of them were that you used on your application and how you think they kind of impacted your application for grad school?
Yeah. I think when you first look at my application, it looks a little hodgepodge, like, what does this girl want to do? Because I was active in the Vietnamese Student Union. I ended up moving my way up to being internal vice president, which meant that I ran the internship and also supervised the projects along with the executive board. And if I were to take anything away, it was more so learning key things that'll make me a successful grad student. So, stress management, time management, how to be resilient under pressure, how to work with different types of people, how to work within kind of like a hierarchy per se, where you have to kind of delegate tasks and have tasks delegated to you, communicate whether or not you're able to responsibly fulfill them. So that's kind of how I approached all of my kind of random type of things. I took undergrad more so as an opportunity to grow. When I first started UCLA, I applied for this kind of position at Ronald Reagan, and which is the hospital associated with UCLA. And when I tell you I tanked the interview, it still haunts me to this day how bad I did on that interview. Like, it was like a classic, like, deer in headlights for some of the moments.
Oh boy.
I like walked out and I was like, something has to change. Like,
Right.
this can't be who I am as a person. And I look back on that moment and I'm so glad that that happened, because that's what got me to thinking I need to be out of my comfort zone more. Like, I was used to being around people who were like me, like I got the benefit of that, you know? And it's not the same like had I gone to like the Midwest, I may not find a niche of like children of immigrants, first time college type of people to be around. So I had to start pushing myself, and that was the catalyst for that. And the other things I did, kind of being in a sorority, taught me all of those kind of interpersonal social skills, especially when we had rush recruitment and you're just interviewing kind of girls coming in, coming out, getting to know people fast. You build that kind of ability to talk no matter what. Like, I could talk to walls now. So, and then I also took a leadership position there. So it sounded like these hodgepodge things, but in my application, I turned it around and said, look at all of these great skills that I've learned. And then you can say, in my hours is where I applied them, you
Right.
know? So, yes, I did some random thing that, like, I wasn't in a pre PT club that didn't exist when I was there, but I learned these skills and I applied them in the real world as like a PTA. And I was successful, and this is how I was successful.
Yeah, I would
So,
love to draw attention to what you're saying here because again, I think this is such an important thing to take away from it. It's you, what you're talking about is basically you have all these experiences, right? And you're drawing from these experiences some sort of conclusion to better yourself. You know, a deer in the headlights during an interview, like a lot of people will, like that'll keep them up at night, right? And I'm sure it's maybe some nights it still does, right? But um, you as a person, you take that moment of what could be considered a bad moment or a failure, and you're like, okay, well, what can I learn from that? Well, I want to be better at doing these things, and I need to figure out how to change. So it turns, in my eyes, a failure, quote unquote, into a very successful moment, because if you learned something from it, and clearly you did, um, and you applied it, that's where the essence of, I think, a lot of what you've been talking about can be used on an application. So, oh, again, just want to draw attention to learning from everything. This is how you apply it, and this is what you need to be talking about in a lot of your application or your essays. Very quality stuff. So, Joanna, where are you now? Are you working yet, or have you
I'm
applied?
not. I have applied to a few places, but I think I have to accept and be honest with myself that I have been having these kind of concrete goals for myself ever since, like, you hear about going to college and you go to college either to get a job or to go to grad school after. And I've been chasing these concrete goals. And I've also been in school for my whole life. Like even in that gap year, I was applying to PT school. So it wasn't like I was a free human and I was still
Right.
working as a PTA. So it's hard sometimes when you feel like you have to be doing something, but I'm taking this time now, and one of the silver linings of COVID and luckily being financially stable is that I can have the opportunity to figure out who I am as a person outside of Joanna going into PT school and Joanna trying to survive PT school and
Right.
Joanna trying to pass these exams. Like, what do I like to do? Who am I?
Right. Yeah, like
And
hobbies,
so,
right? Trying to like
yeah,
what
like,
do I like to do? I haven't had those in forever.
yeah, yeah. So I'm actually taking this time to find that. And I think when I do, I will be so much better with my patients too, because they'll kind of see me as a whole person than me as a lifelong student who now has finally entered the workforce and has no identity besides having been a student.
Right. I mean, you could probably speak to this, but a lot of the times when you're working with patients, I mean, majority of it, there's a very small chunk that's like educating them on something medically related, but a large portion of it is just talking with them, right? And so being able to have talking points like, oh, like I've gone fishing too recently, like that's something you don't do in PT school. So, um,
Yeah, like you want to be able to build a rapport, show them that you're human. Like if your only talking points was how you studied for all day over the weekend, like you're not that fun of a person to be
yeah.
around.
Oh, that's so good. Well, I'm glad that you're taking this opportunity to really sort out, who you are. Yeah, and speaking of that, have you considered what kind of specialty, if you are going to go into any, what kind of specialty you want to go? Like, are you going to be inpatient or more outpatient or?
The way my internships worked, it was outpatient, private ortho, outpatient, private pediatrics, mostly younger kids, and then inpatient, mixed acute kind of med surge floor. And then I was in the ICU for a little bit. Ended up loving being in the hospital. I have to be real with myself now that I think almost every major hospital is on a hiring freeze for PTs. And so that's not going to be a field I go into anytime soon. And also, we're facing a lot of changes in the field right now. You're looking at CMS potential cuts in the upcoming year,
Just with
and
the
there are a lot of
CMS, just for people
factors.
who don't know.
Hmm. So, kind of Medicare, the whole big governing body, they have almost like a standardized sheet where they set the value for things. And so that sets the reimbursement rates, and how PTs historically kind of work is you provide the services, and afterwards the insurances are like, cool beans, here's the money for the services you provided. So that kind of return, it's on the table for being cut. So you're losing how much is going to be returned to you for your services. And it's one of those kind of nuances that sound unpleasant to face, but is the reality of the profession right now. So the great thing is that there's a lot of people rallying behind kind of contacting congressmen and just trying to voice that. You all always say that this profession is important, and we are. We have great outcomes. We help reduce the amount of dependencies on certain medications. We do a lot of great work. It's unfortunately not that, instant, like take a pill and things are solved type
Yeah.
of work. And because of the nature of it, that's what makes it easier for sometimes these higher up kind of positions to think we can cut them. It's
Right.
fine.
Yeah, we tend in government. I mean, I don't want to speak too much about politics, but I know we tend to have like a very short-sighted return, right? And long-term investments tend to not be as prioritized as some of the short-term gains. So, um,
Yeah. So that's just something that like I am considering, and something I think if people aren't thinking about, it doesn't really serve you any benefits in terms of understanding what your profession is going through, what this job stability really means, and how can you voice so that your like profession sustainable. But in terms of where I want to go, I'm open to going anywhere. The key things are kind of what the positions will offer me. So I want to go somewhere where there's good mentorship. As a new grad, you kind of want someone not necessarily to hold your hand, but you want to have a coach. So it's like someone to just throw ideas off of, ask like, I've tried this. I've looked up online and read the literature for this. Have you tried this method? So that's something that's really big for me that once I start more seriously applying, I'll be looking for.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point because, when I was entering grad school, I thought, well, once I graduate, I'm good to go, right? But really, once you've graduated, you're basically at like the bottom of the what's acceptable to be working with a patient, and so you still need like a lot of extra work to get up to a good standard level. So yeah, that's a really good point. You still need to keep working even after you graduate. So you kind of spoke about this a little bit, but where do you see the field of PT going within like the next 10 years? I know obviously there's a lot of changes due to COVID. How do you think that's playing a role? And 10 years down the road, what do you think the career or the field of physical therapy is going to look like?
Optimistically, I'm hoping that, so a lot of, if you look at kind of what's projected, and there's billions of projections to look at, but just generally projections for post COVID is you're going to see a lot of secondary impairments come out, whether they're secondary impairments because of COVID. So after having COVID, there's still like potential cardiopulmonary impairments that people have, or if they were kind of bedridden for a long time, now they have deconditioning they need to face. So those aspects. And then you have the aspects of, well, under this quarantine, people aren't seeking the healthcare that they routinely would do. There's a drop in people going to the emergency room for big things like strokes. And you wonder, how is this happening in silence?
Right.
What is it going to look like? Like, it's not like suddenly we can pause the prevalence of diabetes and be like, oh, let's just stop it really
Yeah.
quick and let COVID finish, and then we'll come back to this monster. Like, these big monsters, heart disease, like they're still there. There's still going to be like arthritis to deal with. And I think those are slowly going to bubble up as kind of everything with COVID settles down. So the need for PT, I don't think is going away anytime soon. I think we're going to see a drop now because we won't be prioritized in terms of space in the hospital, because the goal is just to help these individuals who do get the disease survive, but kind of care in the home. And eventually, if when things open up, care in the clinic is going to pick back up.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing, at least in the long run, we're still going to be like a big thriving profession. But in these more stress times, how we respond as a profession, I think will set us up for either better success or just kind of okay success in the future.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's an opportunity, right? I would agree in as much that there's definitely a drop in what's seen right now available to the profession in terms of jobs. But I think that's going to equal an opposite. When everything's over, there's probably going to be a large spike in a lot of need for physical therapy, especially in home. Um, yeah, a lot of people working now for telehealth, trying to progress that
Yeah.
that aspect, so that might be a potential area of growth within inside the field of PT because not every state has it. So hopefully that we'll see reimbursements for those.
Yeah, and I think it's pushing what people are comfortable with. Traditionally, at least when I meet people who aren't familiar with the field, they're like, "Oh, I go to you after surgery, or I go to you if like something hurts." And it's this great learning opportunity now where it's like, I can do a lot more than just this. Our field is so dynamic, so wide range. Like, if you just even think about that test we just took, the amount of information across the spectrum that we
Yeah.
have to know, it's like not everyone knows you know that much. And now is a good time to be like, hey, I'm qualified in all of these ways. Here's what I can do. And being comfortable with changing the mindset that home health can still have good mentorship, can still provide like all of the things that you in a traditional clinic can get. It's playing around now with the logistics of it and
Right.
making those systemic changes and thinking, how can we make this more enticing, more beneficial, and entice new grads too? Because that's one of my biggest fears is, if I go there, am I just going to get tossed into this person's house by myself? And what
Right.
if I don't know what to do? Like, it's not like in the hospital where I can just be like, hey, can you come help? Like, you're on your own. So
Yeah, you don't want to be
that's
tossed
something
into
I,
that meat grinder of a career without a backup, right?
yeah, and I see now like there's bubblings of it, at least from what I've been seeing on Facebook and different social media forums, but there are changes happening. You just have to be proactive about it because the field is so big, you can also settle and just be a mediocre PT and breeze through your whole life fine.
Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate reality of having such a diverse, such a big profession.
Yeah. I mean, so wow. So this interview, there's been several, I think, very important takeaways that you've presented. A lot of good, just nuggets of gold. So if I can just dig a little deeper and see if I can pry out any more, is there any advice that you'd give to someone who's about to start their journey into PT, whether it be someone who's thinking about this field in general, or someone who's actually in the process of applying right now? Is there anything you feel like it would be good for them to know?
Yeah, my biggest few pieces of advice is look for someone that you feel like you could relate to based on their bio on LinkedIn, their website, or whatever, and reach out to them. Don't be afraid to like cold call or just like email, just send a DM or whatever. Worst case, they don't respond to you. Best case, they respond to you, and now you have someone to talk to. I think these podcasts are a great way of people getting to kind of meet individuals, but it doesn't stop with podcasts. You can physically, well, now you can virtually go and reach out to these individuals and be like, hey, do you have like even 15 minutes to meet with me online? I have some questions. I'm interested in what your thoughts are. And get to know a bunch of different people, get to know their stories. That's kind of my thing that I miss about what like things in the old school way were, where you had these great relationships with individuals and you had these kind of like herds, these pockets of humans that you could go to, these mentors. And now, while we have all this internet and all of these communication tools, it almost feels like we're farther apart from people.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's a very good point because most people in this profession, they would more than happy, they'd be excited to talk to someone and be
yeah.
like, yeah, this is what it was like for me. That's part of the reason why I wanted to start this series, is because it gives the opportunity, right, for people to kind of talk about what it was like for them to get into PT school. But yeah, no, it's such a good message. Just reach out, ask someone, because I mean, most everyone in this profession is going to be just excited to talk about helping you figure out how to get in. So. Wow, so great, so many pearls. I would encourage everyone to go back and listen to this episode again. Maybe click it on 2 times speed and just get all this information, because there's so much gold in here to just process. Like a cow has like 7 stomachs, right? And the reason why is because it doesn't get everything good
Yeah.
the first time, so it has to digest it again and again. So this is one of those shows where there's a lot of meat on the bone here. So go back and listen to this again. There's a lot to take away. So yeah, I just want to thank you so much for your time coming on and talking. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that find themselves in a better position in life from your words. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for setting up the podcast and having me on here. I think it's a good step in kind of opening up the vague mystery of what PT is going to be like, is like, and what it's like trying to get in.
Yeah, thank you so much. Right, hey, you have a good one now. Okay, take care.
All right, you too.